Good morning, film dogs!
Hey, I'm Mr. B.
Hey, are we saying good morning to ourselves?
Good morning. We're saying good morning to the audience.
Yeah,
because it might be morning.
So it's kind of like Negan, yeah. Like we're everybody's Negan, we're everybody's film dogs.
Yeah, or it could be MOU.
It could
R
be. Oh,
ING.
very good.
Good morning.
Yeah, but post draft it could be good morning. Hey, I was thinking that maybe you what you could have also was like good morning St. Petersburg, because apparently we're super popular in Russia.
The Russians.
Yeah.
If you live in Russia, could you please follow us on Instagram or shoot us a message or anything and tell us what you like or don't like about the pod?
I kind of feel like it's kind of a compliment that we're so popular in Russia because like it's home of the great chess players of the world.
That's correct.
It's home of the great pianist of the world.
Yep.
It's home of
the Kalashnikov,
Dostoevsky and Tolstoy.
Yeah.
Some of the great art ever produced by humanity has come from Russia. So, man, maybe that's a good sign.
Or it's somebody just using like an IP blocker and they're saying they're from Russia. I'm not sure, but
It could be.
I do like to see the stats.
I wouldn't be overly concerned is that we're sort of like we're a pro-Russian podcast. Hey, look, here's something to be said. Russians are humans, and not all humans should be necessarily lumped into the same category as what their government is in this sense, where what's going on in Ukraine and historically there's bad picture painted of Russia or the Soviet Union. And I'd really like to point out that all of the Russian people I've met are awesome. I actually before I moved to Australia, I was in a bit of a Russian crowd. I had a mad crush on.
You had a Russian crew?
Yeah, Ocean City, Maryland was like this big. Russians came and spent the year there for studies abroad. There's this big Russian community. I had a big crush on this Russian girl. I was trying to learn, I was trying to get my my workmate who was Belarusian to teach me Russian, and particularly some Russian poetry, so that I could try to woo.
I was literally going to use the word woo.
Yeah,
we need to bring that word back.
I was trying to woo.
Yeah.
It was did
the wooing work? Did you learn any poetry?
I did. I can't remember any of it now, but like I was pretty fluent with this one poem, and I kind of got laughed at. Like I don't know if it was really like a cute laugh. I was kind of embarrassed. I was like, okay, well, I tried to make a good go at it. I did more than probably what the Russian guys would have done. So yeah.
Russian politics. Hey, what a great segue, because on this episode, what are we talking about?
We're not talking about Russia. We are talking about the United States of America.
Civil War.
Civil War.
New movie, A24.
Super divisive film.
Alex Garland, director. Kirsten Dunst, starring.
We saw it in the VMAX.
We did, which is the Aussie version of good cinema.
Yeah, it's the best.
So we don't really have an IMAX in Brisbane officially.
It's the best local theater to see something in for sound and for just a slightly bigger screen.
Yeah, if you're
immersive experience.
If you're going for nerdy stats, which we are, that is the point of our why we have a film podcast. Is we've VMAX here gives you at least Atmos, which is a different way to stereo mix something. It's not just left and right, or it's not just 5.1 surround. It's all directions in motion. You're in the war.
It's immersive. Like it's so immersive.
Yeah.
I for this type of film, and like Dune 2, where the sound becomes its own character. Like it just is so fabulous to absorb it in that way. So much so that to see it in another theater after, like if it's a movie that you want to see twice, Go see it in a smaller theater first and save VMAX because if you do VMAX first and then go, it's going to be sort of a bit of a letdown.
Yeah. It's a bit of a fizzle if you're, because I saw Dune twice, and the first time was VMAX and the second was a regular cinema, and you're kind of like, hey, it was good, but If you're going to watch a good movie, like a movie that is sci-fi or about fighting or war mixes or music, go see it in the biggest cinema or something that gives you Atmos or some sort of surround. Something crazy.
Civil War. What did you think?
Well, I mean, this was one of our most anticipated films of 2024.
Indeed.
At least in my opinion. And you had drafted this film because I couldn't get to it first. In fact, I think it didn't come up on my studied search. And then when you got it, I got real sad. And I'm still a bit sad. Because you have Dune 2 currently sitting on your roster, as well as Civil War, and currently the best two films that we've seen this year.
I love the way that you have just said currently on my roster.
Currently.
I think those are two that are staying on my roster long term.
Well, it's not free. It's not, we haven't done any trades. It's not free agency yet.
Not yet. Hey, I would say I think it was my third pick. So you had like the Furiosa and the Joker. So like I don't think I did it based on I didn't have any idea. Obviously, we loved Alex Garland's previous films, Ex Machina. Obviously, we both love, and Men we both love.
Yep.
And I know you haven't seen Annihilation yet, but I think Alex Garland is one of those directors and writers that. He's got that super strong A24 vibe to no matter what he does. It just doesn't matter what he does. He represents everything that A24 is about. So I think automatically that we would go see anything that he does.
Well, I mean, for a listener who's wondering what you mean by an A24 vibe or Alex Garland fitting that, what could you expand upon that?
I would say that it tends to be a now this is not true for every single A24 film, but they tend to be maybe a little peculiar.
Yeah.
They tend to be a little slow burn. They tend to have a hint of strangeness. They do a lot of light horror themes in a more serious context.
Yeah.
Most of their films tackle darker themes in a sort of a realistic setting. Like nothing's so super hardcore that I guess Everything Everywhere All at Once is a different kind of thing. Like that's super multiversal. But for the most part, what I love about A24 is they're low budget. The director gets a lot of creative control. So you see a product that's not designed to make a lot of profit. It's but still entertaining. And there's a huge difference. And I think most people eventually would understand what that difference is.
Yeah.
You have your huge Hollywood tentpoles. And then you have directors like Alex Garland that make small meditative films that he wants complete control. And obviously this is showing up in the audience criticism of it. And even, I guess, the professional criticism of it as well. Hugely divisive. There's not really too much middle ground. People love it or they hate it. And I think this is the first Garland film that really feels like you either love it or hate it. And I wonder what that says. Is it the subject material? Sure, it is the subject material.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about the divisiveness?
Well, if we're jumping right into the film, so because like we said, highly anticipated for us, couldn't wait to see it. I'm a longtime Kirsten Dunst fan as well, so that was a biggie for me. It is also starring Kaylee Spaney as well, who Garland has used before in Devs, his show, which you turned me on, which is a pretty interesting show, worth your time. But also recently played Priscilla as well, which I really enjoyed. Took Mrs. B to see that on a date night.
And she's also going to be in Alien Romulus, soon to be released at the theater. So like a big year for her.
It's a big year for her.
Yeah.
And I'm keen. I'm ready for some of the newer blood that we're seeing in a lot of the movies that we're watching. There's a lot of good young actors out there.
I concur.
There's a lot of good young talent that I'm kind of excited for. And I'm loving even when like the Big Pick kind of does their top, what do they call it, 35 under 35 or different age ranges and stuff. Is we've got a pretty good new crew coming through of movie star material, that could give it another 5-10 years.
And speaking of sort of the A24 thing, that some of these actors that will they're more interested in having a craftsman's career as opposed to a movie star career, if that makes sense.
Yes. So, well, I mean, A24 is kind of that more a smaller budget, more art house distribution company. So it's the same reason for people making music on maybe smaller labels and stuff. Because remember Film Dogs, we're highly into music. But the reason why a smaller artist would be on a smaller record label to have a bit more creative control.
Yeah, you don't want to you don't have to follow all of the trends of what's selling or what's getting the high streaming rates. You get to make what you want.
Yeah, and be able to partner with somebody who wants you to make your best art. And that's kind of I think that's part of the A24 vibe.
Totally.
So when we saw it opening night, I was did you feel a bit silent after the film?
No,
What was your mood? What was feelings?
My very specific feeling was it was all about rating. I was like, well, I just watched a 5-star film. I was interested in what you thought of it. I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to talk massively about it, about many things. And I think what I recall thinking was like, I'm not going to just oversay because of recency bias or because I drafted it or because it's Alex Garland. I'm not going with an immediate 5-star rating. I'm going to go with 4.5 and let it sort of sit with me for a while. But man, I could not shake it. And I still can't shake it. Man, it's a week later and I am obsessed with it. I am obsessed with the film itself. I'm also obsessed with how it's being received. And for the reasons that people are either in love with it or loathe it. It's so interesting. So coming out of the theater, I was supercharged. I could have watched it twice in a row, but for so many reasons. For the A24 vibe, for the cast, for a Garland film, for the subject material, super heavy themes, the soundtrack, the score, the sound, where we saw it in the VMAX, good Film Dogs night out. Dude, it was a great night for me. I really loved it. And that was sort of what I was thinking leaving the theater. I'll say the divisive comments on social media, it's crazy. I just, I shouldn't be that surprised because Past Lives was very silly. If you go in and if somebody has, let's say Dendy Cinemas has, we're re-releasing Past Lives, it's going to be on IMAX. The amount of people that'll be like, oh, I didn't get it. Or, oh, this is so overhyped, or Look, I'm certainly not here to be a critic of taste.
Yeah.
Somebody's personal taste is their personal taste. What I'll say about Past Lives and for Civil War both is it either emotionally destroys you or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, that is okay. But do you need to go out and destroy it on your little keyboard warrior comments if you don't get it or it's not to your taste? And I feel like I need to go and defend Alex Garland because he doesn't want to. He's taken a step away from the director's chair, which is depriving us of great movies. and I want to change that. I want people to understand. It's you don't have to love Alex Garland movies. You don't have to love A24 movies. But does that mean here's first off, you should understand that when you go see something this type of film is not going to see the Avengers. Captain America Civil War, which is sort of, it's going to make everybody happy. A24s aren't going to make everybody. It's only for a specific kind of taste. And I guess it's great that people are getting to the theater, but man, we had people walking out of the theater and our reviewing of it. I don't think it was even a half an hour in. There was people walking out.
Which was you kind of wonder, did you watch the trailer or were you aware of the title of the film? So what did you expect?
That's that's the thing for me is what was the expectation? I certainly knew what I was in for. and I was just relieved that it was such a great movie. But like people are just ripping it, and I some of the major criticisms are that it doesn't take a hardcore stand on politics. First off, I totally disagree.
Yeah.
It is all there. Here's what the difference is. Alex Garland's not holding your hand and spoon feeding you the narrative.
Yeah, correct.
But it's all like everything's there. Absolutely everything that somebody wants politically is there. You just have to think for yourself.
Correct.
Now, some people don't want to go to the movie theater to think. They want to go to escape. And I totally respect that. As a matter of taste, if someone disagrees that they don't like the Civil War at all, as a matter of taste, but God bless you. I have no issues with that. But if the criticism is that this film has nothing to say, man, I invite you to the Thunderdome and let's battle it out like Mad Max and Master Blaster.
Yeah.
Because you're insane. This film has so much to say. This film has so much to say. It's just the fact that it makes you think about it before it gives you any kind of answers that you have to reach for yourself. It just, I guess it bums me out that people aren't willing to kind of give it that kind of chance. But at the same time, you know, it becomes one of those niche things. Eventually, all the haters will fall through. And in 10 years, people are going to be talking about this film the way that we talk about Ex Machina now. The lovers will love it, and the haters will hate it. And I would say, I would imagine, like Dune 2 is really, really fantastic. People will still be talking about that in 10 years. But I think in 10 years, Civil War will be one of the most talked about movies still. It will be relevant. People will be drafting it in future film drafts every single year, like as the best of 24. It's going to take all of that hate to get out of there once people are able to understand what it means, since they can't figure it out for themselves. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but this, dude, you know what a great movie this was for so many reasons, and it has a lot of love. The biggest debut of A24 ever.
Yeah, congrats.
Number one at the global box office, number one at the American domestic box office, in red and blue states. Man, you can't tell me that everybody that loves this and has propelled it to a 25.7 million opening is wrong. It's not going to do Dune numbers, but Dune 1 also didn't do well. This movie's not going to get a sequel, but man, I loved it. I really, I would at the moment say I am super happy that I drafted it, because if it was a real draft where we were going in and I had to pick between Dune and Civil War, I don't really know that I don't think I could make a solid pick on which one I would take, because I love Civil War so much. I would say I might like it more than Dune.
Well, that's kind of what we want to talk about tonight, is unpacking Civil War, all of our thoughts around the film, which we've kind of gotten some of them out there, but we want to talk about what moved us in the film, potentially physically, like sound.
Totally.
And soundtrack. So we want to talk about today, wherever you are, the top 5, or our top 5. Here's some good recommendations for best war movies with soundtracks or sound design,
where the sound is so essential or part of the characteristics of the film, where it is almost its own cast member, where it's either so important or a reflection without the music or without the particular sound library is not the same film.
Something that it's going hand in hand with what was shot. It is part of the intention behind the movie, is the soundtrack that went with it, or the way that they mixed the film with sound.
Well, I think that we can, I feel like we could tackle getting straight into the Civil War soundtrack, and we can speak on some of the acting choices that goes along with that. But as we've already said, Kirsten Dunst, man, as far as potential acting noms, I hope
Oscars and stuff.
Yeah, or I hope that she gets a lead nom for this, because she was. I think this is my favorite Kirsten Dunst film.
Really,
I really do. Yeah, Melancholia is up there. I would sort of juggle maybe between those two, but I just, man, I can't tell you how much I just really she she gave it everything, and she embodied this character. Like, she wasn't over the top. She's such a stately woman. Like, she's graceful, and she does I don't want to say the bare minimum, but she can do the bare minimum without overacting.
I would say she blooms well.
Yeah, like, oh man, she was really good. Kelly Spacey. Yeah, so Alex Garland has a huge cast of people that show up in Devs.
Yeah,
they show up in Ex Machina.
But great actors, which includes surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, Nick Offerman, Stephen McKinley Henderson. How about Jefferson White from Yellowstone?
Yeah.
And there's a few other people that kind of make small cameos, but
the biggest one, Mr. Jesse Plemons, Mr. Kirsten Dunst.
Mr. and Mrs.
I like scene of the for me. It will be. I feel like if we have an episode of best scenes of the year, the scene with Jesse Plemons.
Well, let's maybe unpack the film before we jump into scenes and stuff like that.
I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. I'm so excited. Oh my goodness.
So premise of the film, if you're somebody who hasn't seen the movie or maybe has watched the trailer, wondering if you should go see it, maybe you are aware of the rage for and against the film currently, because it is quite the divisive film, at least on social media.
Synopsis is, in the near future, a group of war journalists attempt to survive while reporting the truth as the United States stands on the brink of civil war. Yeah.
And that's literally where it sits. And when it says near future, it could be tomorrow, could be a few years from now. It's not like it's set like it's necessarily post-apocalyptic world that we're living in, though there are definitely a lot of scenes where you see blown up skyscrapers, and you see some pretty cars on the side of the road and everything like that. So it's not fallout, it's not fallout, but there's parts of the United States that are completely obliterated and other parts that have their heads in the sand.
Very war torn. Mm-hmm. Now let's just talk, should we talk lightly about that? So we briefly see New York City.
Yep.
We briefly see the suburbs of Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
We briefly see Charlottesville.
Yep. We
briefly see Washington, D.C. Now, all of these places are what sort of impacted the most by the war, whereas the small towns are maybe a little less unaffected.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is the first hint of what politically is being said. The major cities, which tend to be red leaning. Cities tend to be red. Rural tends to be blue.
Yep.
So I think that the fact that the war is taking place in these cities, obviously Washington, D.C., but with New York City and Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Charlottesville, and those areas, I think they're sort of saying that definitely the passionate people on both sides of any kind of color line, political color, is where the war is taking place, largely out in the rural zones, and it sort of addresses that. People are pretending that the war is not really happening. Yeah, so it follows journalists and what their motivation is for trying to get there, and the ultimate sort of hero's quest of this film is to get to Washington, D.C. and report on what's going on in the Civil War. They want to interview the president and get some pictures of the president. And Kirsten Dunst is a photographer. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
The photography aspect. This is like, for me, man, I tell you what, like I have made a living off of photography. I'm a huge photography enthusiast. I have such a respect for everybody in the photography field that does anything with a camera. I just love camera work. And this film is photography centric. It is shot in a way where it's beautiful. It's about photographers, and they put the still shots into the scenes while they're shooting, and like the picture that you would look at when you're checking your digital camera to see what kind of photo you did, they kind of do that like on the big screen. It was just beautiful. Like the kind of still shots that they had, if they just if they put out a book of the still shots or like a postcard collection of the still shots,
A24 definitely will.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you know they will. Yeah, you should join the A24 fan club, by the way. You'd get things like that. The shots, the photography was so beautiful. It was impactful. If you think about, if you've seen anything about like war journalism, let's say like The Year of Living Dangerously, just anything, Full Metal Jacket, with a similar theme of journalism and war, is this just takes it to a whole nother level. The way that it's been shot is very unique. It was beautiful to watch. Besides the immaculate production and set design, the way that they interspersed the still shots into the moving frames, and it was pretty consistent throughout the whole movie. Yeah, I thought that was very tasteful and just really well pulled off. Like you just can't do to do new things with cinematography these days. It's just really hard. Like, and a lot of people, I don't think, movie enthusiasts are really into that kind of thing, but the general public, I don't really feel like they're not as in tune with like, oh yeah, still frames. What does that mean? They're just not into it. They want to be moved in a different way. But I think for A24 people, like we really appreciate good cinematography and good composition. And that from the cinematography perspective, it was devastatingly good. As good as Dune 2. Yeah, I'd put it up there. These movies compete on sort of every single level: sound, cinematography, acting. I don't think Dune 2 is going to get a nom. Like they might get Rebecca Ferguson or Javier Bardem. I hope Kirsten Dunst gets a nom. I don't see anybody else really. Maybe Plemons could get. That would be a great.
You reckon they would give him supporting for that scene?
I do.
I mean, we've not seen that many from this year yet of the big blockbusters.
I'll say right now, I hope so, because he kills it. He just kills it. Oh man, I want everybody to go see this.
Yeah,
I just do. Man, I want Alex Garland to keep making films forever. Like 2 films a year, please, Mr. Garland.
Well, and we've got the score, who's by Jeff Barrow and Ben Salisbury, but also head sound design Glenn Fremantle, with a surrounding team of mix engineers. And
should we just go really quickly into maybe what for those out in Film Dogs audience land? So we've got score, we have soundtrack, and we have sound design, and those 3 things make up your entire audio experience.
Yeah, what you hear in the movie.
So largely, the director tends to pick what the soundtrack will be. Like he picks the songs that have already been recorded by bands or whatever, and so how would this fit into the film? And then you have your composers for the score, which is playing the normally sort of classical music or something similar, orchestral, to give emotion to the film. So when it's a dark scene, they play in minor music, and when it's a happy scene, they play in major music. And if it's weird, like the score can do so many things to propel how we're supposed to be feeling for the music. It's kind of a way of hand-holding, really. And then we have the sound design. So how do gunshots sound, and how do cars sound, and how does the actors' voices sound? And is it dynamic, and is it 3D, or is it one-dimensional, or is it two-dimensional? And I got to tell you, I think that it was A+ on soundtrack, it was A+ on score, and it was A+ on sound design all the way through.
Which will be interesting come award season if they'll get what they'll get noms for, because you kind of comparing it to kind of some of the bigger blockbusters of the year, like we've already seen Dune 2, and that is an epic cinema movie specifically for sound design. I mean, but also soundtrack as well. Famously a Hans Zimmer. But man, it is for a war movie. I think we were kind of talking about it. It almost kind of contained the essence of what we remember from watching the film Heat.
Very solid comparison. So solid. Like the thing about Heat, right? The sound is what sort of makes it prestige.
And when we're talking about sound, I guess we're talking about, this is Civil War. We're talking about being in battles and gunfight and yelling and screaming and mayhem, and
also silence and concussion what does it sound like to have
Yeah.
a grenade go off right next to your ear, and you like, and then everything's either silent and it slowly comes back, and not only like it comes back soft and and then it has a volume swell. Man, like anybody that's into sound design, and you would know you should already know that you should go see this, but if you've just been sort of on cruise control for a while, if you're into sound design,
Here's your sign.
Oh yeah, like here is your guidepost. I will come pick you up and take you to the theater if you need to go. I will, even if you're in Russia.
Especially if you're in Russia.
Especially if you're in Russia. Just take us to a theater that has subtitles, please.
Yeah, I can't read Russian.
Do you see all these books here?
Those are I do see some old books on the Film Dogs table.
What language do you think they're in?
They are in Russian.
They are definitely
because
Russian.
I already knew that from past stories. But you've read them all cover to cover, right?
Oh, totally. I have. I have to make up my own stories, but yeah, I've read them.
Yeah, you got the life and times of Lord Marcus.
I was like, here's the nice thing about having Russian books that nobody else can read, including myself, is I could say whatever I want. I could sit here and sort of narrate one of the books out loud, just make up whatever I want. Hey, this is a story about journalists in a war-torn America.
Sounds like a movie I just saw recently.
Oh man, it was so good. I can't say enough about it. Needle Drops, the soundtrack was so good. I'll say this about Jeff Barrow. So Jeff Barrow, more famously known as the head creative of Portishead. Man, oof. And Ben Salisbury and Jeff Barrow have done every single Alex Garland film. So let's say mad props to Alex Garland for his superior musical taste.
Yeah. And I mean, and mad props for choosing a team and sticking with him and knowing who your people are, because he knows who his people are.
That's his tribe. And I don't think enough things can be said about that. Like, the director gets the accolades.
Yeah.
He also gets the major criticism if the movie sucks. So it's kind of like a lose-lose, win-win. But when you've got your crew and you stick with that crew, like, man, that's your family. That's your filmmaking family, man. Like, that makes me jealous. Like, more than like wanting to make films. Like, I want to be part of a family like that. Like, really, dude, you're with the same people all the time. These actors and actresses are like Stephen McKinley Henderson. He's a mainstay through
throughout his career. Yeah.
Oscar Isaac has been in a couple of Garland films. Like, when you just, that synergy that's created is so great. I just love it. So they did the score, but I guarantee you that the reason the director normally picks the songs, Quentin Tarantino will pick every single song on the soundtrack, and he's a master of that. But Silver Apples, Love Fingers, is a song that is on the soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a huge Portishead freak. I just, they're one of my favorites of all time. Like, they just sit kind of like, I'll tell you this. If you asked me to pick between Tom York and Radiohead, and Jeff Barrows, Beth Gibbons, and Portishead, some days I would go with Jeff Barrows and Portishead over Tom York and Radiohead.
Ooh.
I would. Particularly when I'm in that cinematic mode, because I think that Portishead has a much, particularly Jeff Barrow, but even Beth Gibbons and Adrian Utley, I think that they think very visually about how their music would be applied to visuals. And I don't think that Tom York and Radiohead really think that way. And if you're in the mood for something like that, if you're into movies, I kind of think that Portishead's a little more cinematic, and then therefore I would be more in the mood for them. So I've read interviews with Jeff Barrow where he's a massive, huge Silver Apples guy, and Can and White Noise. These sort of formative electronic bands from the late 60s and early 70s, which Silver Apples is. And that's the opening song in the movie. But we get Needle Drops from De La Soul in a way that is it's kind of funny. It's kind of like dark humor. I don't want to give anything away, but just sort of give you a vibe. You're going to get old 70s birth of electronic music, and then you're going to get into 1989 sampled hip hop, and then you're going to get into Sturgill Simpson, The Breakers Roar, Suicide. Oh man, the list goes on. Like, the soundtrack is so perfectly executed. It comes into the scenes like it's a marriage. the soundtrack is a marriage to the film,
Yeah.
and it might be an unusual marriage, but sometimes an unusual marriage.
It works.
It's super fun to watch and be a part of, and yeah, I just can't say enough about how great the soundtrack is. Mad props to Ben Salisbury and Jeff Barrow. We know from Alex Garland's other films that the music is very kind of eerie. There's not really anything. It's not hopeful music.
Yeah. No, it's not.
But it's interesting and it's modern and it says something and it's great and I love it and I want to talk about it. I want to break it down. I want people to listen to it. I want people to hear it and understand. So for music lovers and sound lovers, I promise you, regardless of your personal politics, I don't think it really takes up it. What do you think? Do you think the movie Civil War takes a stand for either side of the political divide?
I don't. And that's why I find the divisiveness on people that love or hate it, I find it so odd. Mainly because I don't think it necessarily takes it doesn't necessarily tell you what to think.
Yeah, it doesn't validate anybody's personal politics. It's just a real honest snapshot. But here's the thing, and that's okay. It's not telling you if you feel this way you're bad or if you feel this way you're good.
Yeah.
It's about journalists, and journalists are reporting truth. And this is like the central theme is that all they care about is like, it's up to people to decide. We take the pictures. They decide what to feel about it.
Well, exactly. And I guess whole part of that point is journalistic integrity. And you even mentioned at how far will you go to get the shot? And what are you willing to compromise to get that shot? Whether it's throughout your career or in one moment to take a certain picture, what are the ethics behind it? Should you take that picture? Should you be with that side or those people documenting it? And the truth is when it comes to journalism and the news and things like that, is we need to know. Yeah. You need to be able to see what's going on. And yet at the same time, when you aren't there yourself and you're just slidden across the table a newspaper with a front page with a picture can say 1,000 words, but it is kind of up to you when you see the picture, what emotion's coming up, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? Is this right? Is this wrong? Should I be enraged? And this is what the movie is about.
I know, I feel that it's this big melting pot of ideas that should get people stimulated to talk about things rather than helping you decide or validate your personal politics. So I think that this is, I am criticizing the critics, but I'm not really.
We're coming for you, critics.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is to explain that. First off, it's just a movie. Come on, guys. Like, it's not enough to incite violence or to make you feel stressed and agitated and irritated coming out of the theater. It's a movie. It's meant to be entertaining. It's also meant to be thought-provoking. And this is a thought-provoking type of piece. It's meant to get you talking about things. It certainly is, I think, a very, if not the most, certainly in the top kind of thought pieces of what does the short-term future of the United States look like. And because this is super real. This could happen next election. This could happen.
Well, I think that's probably part of the discourse of why maybe people don't like it or are uncomfortable with the movie. And you and I, maybe we are the odd people out. In fact, we probably are when it comes to society and stuff like that. Is I like being challenged. I like not being in a room full of people who believe and think the exact same way as me.
So well put. I think that sums up it doesn't sum us up completely, but it certainly sums up, I think, maybe in very many aspects that we are comfortable in a room of multiple opinions, no matter what the subject matter is.
And to be able to be I use this phrase often in life. Seek to understand. And that is kind of part of a whole life theme, and what I feel like we should kind of all kind of strive for. Because the truth is like I don't need you to validate my politics. I don't need you to validate my religious views. But what I need you to do is not to be a jerk about it in a conversation. But I would love to be able to have a conversation with you on something that we may or may not agree about, and be able to have an open discussion on why you don't think the same way as I do.
And this is kind of so well put. Thank you. Like, so eloquent. I think one of the things that I'm personally struggling with is, sort of like as podcasters and trying to get our voices heard and from a promotional standpoint, because like I want to promote, the reason I do this is because I want to give the gift of films that people haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And to sort of say, hey, you might like this or you won't don't waste your time.
Mm-hmm.
And don't waste anybody's time because you're going to hate it. Like that's my main thing. And in this type of environment, like through social media, you can't have conversations. People post a comment and it's full of hatred and just I hate it. I hate like what's motivating all this wrath? But you can't have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
Because that's not posting comments is not having a conversation.
Correct. It is the illusion of a conversation.
It's the illusion of a conversation.
I think a lot of people think they're having a conversation when they comment back and forth with you, but I go, you don't know, you don't have tone, you don't have context with the other person, anything like that. It's just everybody's in their own way quite easily becomes a keyboard warrior real quick.
Well, you think the words that you're choosing are more powerful, but we're using the same words. And that's the thing that really frustrates me is it's almost an abuse of the English language or the Russian language or anybody like human language. It's an abuse of that by not having a conversation, by saying you're posting something and saying, it's this, this idea of superiority is like, as soon as I post it, this is a fact. It is, we can't even argue about it because what I have put online is a fact and this movie sucks. And that's the end of it. It's not a conversation. And like, I want to have conversations. I want to like, I can't even, Mr. B, if you hated this film, I would be so okay with that. If anybody that hates it, I'm okay with that. But I'm really upset that people won't have a conversation, or particularly, as you said, if they're looking for some sort of political validation, and this film is not giving them the validation that they want, like it's going to end up being turning people to vote a different way. Mm-hmm. Right? There's all this political like for controversial people, just stay away from it. Stay away from me, please, because I want to be around people that want to talk and have disagreements. I don't mind having disagreements. Mm-hmm. It's how people get closer. You get introduced to new things. Like the best things have not happened in the past. The best things are still yet to come.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Correct.
God.
Well,
anyway, Civil War sort of stands that for me. All right, let's get back into Civil War. I largely want to stay spoiler free, but I'll say this: that the analogy to Heat with the battle sequences, mm-hmm. how the gunshots sounded, how all of the military scenes, all of the battle sequences, the soundtrack, A+ all the way around, like 100 out of 100 for everything sound related in this film.
Yeah, it's almost nauseating.
It's uncomfortable. It's
the gunfire, explosions, and visuals that go along with them, and the way that they shot it as well with the cast of the reactions to all that stuff. Is it really? It's a lot of it is shot like it's like even third person or even like first person. Like it jumps like you're there with them. And then there's moments where it jumps to where, no, you're just focusing on Kirsten Dunst, or you're just focusing on Wagner Moura's character, Joel, who's kind of, we just know he is another kind of journalist who's driving. And why I also love the film is I don't mind ambiguity. And that upsets people. And a lot of these, we don't know a lot of Kirsten Dunst's background. We don't know a lot of Wagner Moura, his character's background. the Kaylee Spaney's character.
We don't really
this
know.
new young,
We don't really know
photographer.
anybody's background, which is great. And I think I listen to criticism about it and say like, we don't know enough. But audience are playing catch up. This happens in so many movies. Like, why all of a sudden is this the movie that is upsetting people for having to play catch up from frame one? And no answers. Like, why is America a Civil War? Why does it matter? That's not this story. And I think that people want that to be the story. Let me give you some great advice, people that want that. Go pick up a pen and paper and write that story and shoot it.
Yeah.
You can do it. Everybody can do this. Don't rip somebody else's apart for their creativity and their art and what they have wanted to do. Like I really want to be respectful of everybody's opinion, and I am. I respect everybody's taste. But if you say that this film has nothing to say, and you think you're after for some sort of validation,
then you
can't give you validation. Films cannot give you validation. They cannot. It's impossible. Nothing can give any kind of validation that you're seeking in that kind of sense. You're always going to be dissatisfied, no matter what. And this film, if this film's only thing at the end of the day gets people talking about that, it's also a success. But it kind of feels like Civil War, like the Instagram, social media is a civil war because people love it or hate it.
Yeah.
It's kind of meta.
That is the movie. There are so many takes on it of apply it to the internet, apply it to America, apply it to politics, apply it to journalism.
I kind of like the idea in this film that, it kind of seems like maybe all of the internet service providers are down. There's no internet anymore. Everything's gone back to a bit of analog, like super analog, but nobody knows anything about analog. So you kind of have to craft some things. All of these little touches, it is, man, dude, I'm telling you right now, hot take, my number one movie of the year. It might not last until December 31st, but right now, it's my number one movie over Dune 2.
Boom. It has been said.
Luckily, I got Dune 2 on my team as well.
Let it be.
Let it be.
Let it be.
I would like to move on to maybe examining some other similar themes, but is there anything else we want to talk about Civil War? The only thing I want to say additional about Civil War is please go see it, and please go see it in the best theater with the best sound possible. And again, if you're going to rewatch it, go rewatch it in the theater.
Yeah, and take somebody with you.
Take somebody with you.
Challenge somebody else in your circle.
Man, and then go out for dinner afterwards for pizza and talk about it. And this is, I think, one of the most relevant films for sparking conversations.
It is incredibly thought-provoking.
Yeah, like don't put it off till afterwards. Whether or not you're United States, whether or not you are Russian, whether I love you, Russia. Whether or not you have $300 Canadian,
whether you're part of the Western Forces or the Florida Alliance or the Loyalist states.
Last thing that I want to just say is, all right, so one of the premises of this film is that Texas and California have joined forces to overthrow the American government.
The Western Forces, yep.
The Western Forces, the Western Alliance.
Against the Loyalist states.
One of the criticisms is that how could Texas and California ever join forces? Oh my God. Like, I'm putting this challenge out to anyone. Yep. I will meet you in the Thunderdome. I will meet you in a court of law with Al Pacino as the devil overseeing. It doesn't matter. I will have this conversation with anyone. It makes complete sense. There's one of the two richest oil bearing states in the United States. What would it take to fund an army to overthrow the United States? Money.
What about population as well? It just is California and Texas.
And but here's the thing. Do you know why that California is a red state? It's because of Los Angeles. It's not because of the rural California.
Yeah.
They have more in common. They have way more in common than people would suspect. People would say that that's not realistic. Man, I think that maybe you should go take a couple of classes of political science at the college and teach yourself some things about how economics works, because this is all about money and power. The film's about money and power. Well, it's not. That's sort of like part of the world building is about money and power, because that is what unites Texas and California to join forces.
I also like that creative choice though for
I do
people that get pissy about making very specific political statements of by saying it's California and Texas, and a lot of people kind of being like, oh, I don't know if they would do that. Well, then good, because it is allowing you to then kind of make up your own mind and kind of and also go, yeah, I'm not sure if that would happen or could it happen. Well, maybe it could. Oh, Florida and Texas and California. Well, that's strange. Well, yeah, it's not meant to be. It's not meant to be one for one and literal. Everybody wants this to be literal. Like he's making a documentary. It's not real people.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like this. Thank you. It's not a documentary on actual events. And again,
it is a great commentary.
The enemy of our enemy tends to be our friend, and in this case, I'm going to hold off on my personal political views about what it means, but this like that because this is the beauty of it. Everybody can assign their own political views, and I don't want to validate anybody's politics, even if it's in agreements, because that's something that's extremely personal. And I'm not being a coward by not taking a stand. I'm just respecting everybody's personal politics. That's the biggest favor I can do. Like, I'm not telling anybody how to feel. I really am not. I don't want to tell people how to feel. I don't want to validate how people feel. I want to have a conversation about how people feel. And that's all I want to have, and have a respectful conversation about how people feel.
Yep.
And be treated with respect in return. That's all I'm talking about. Boom. Loved it. 5 stars for me for Civil War. Best movie of the year so far for Lord Marcus.
I ended up, maybe it could swap to 5 for me. It's not that couldn't reach there, but I gave it 4.5 on the night, and I've still kind of given it 4.5 just for personal reasons. I thought some of the dialogue could have been written a bit tighter. I just found some of the beginning kind of leading in, I don't like using the word cheesy, but sometimes there were some cheesy lines where I'm kind of going, that's not normally what would happen in a conversation from new people that have just met each other. And yeah. But that being said, that's why I gave it, to me, it wasn't a perfect film, and I save a 5 for what I consider in my mind a perfect film. And I go, well, no, it wasn't a perfect film, but it was pretty damn close.
The other thing that kind of normally one of my 5-star films would have something very Lynchian, and even Alex Garland normally has something extremely weird, extremely weird in his films, and this sort of lacked that, but it made up for it with the sound and for the provocation and for being willing to not hold your hand.
And was it because Sturgill Simpson was in the soundtrack?
Well, I will never disrespect Mr. Sir Sturgill
Dude,
Simpson.
what a great scene. Helicopters and all. Yeah.
How often did you find yourself? I noticed that when Sturgill, that you were doing a little sound hound to figure out who it was.
Well, to be honest, because you listen to him more than I do, so his voice to me isn't instantly recognizable. Where I'd assume you would have known it was him. And did you already know the song?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know his discography.
A Sailor's Guide to Earth was like his 2017, and I just
I definitely looked up the album right after.
Darjeeling and I were listening to it last night, as a matter of fact. And she's like, "Oh, what's this?" I was like, "What's like? We've listened to this so many times, Sturgill." Because it's more of that sort of 70s country. It's got like a lot of orchestral strings, sort of an Elvis Las Vegas vibe almost for half of the album. Anyway, I'm not going to get off on Sturgill. Yeah, if you don't love Sturgill Simpson, I invite you to check out his entire discography because he's totally badass. And he was an actor in Killers of the Flower Moon. And he's multi-genre talent. But the theme of this evening is war films.
War films, which takes us to 4 more films.
Because I definitely would rate Civil War as being in the top 5 war films where sound and soundtrack and score are its own character and elevates the movie to another level.
Definitely.
Awesome.
Second film. Let's jump into a little bit of Christopher Nolan.
Boom.
Dunkirk.
Let's talk about what do you think of Dunkirk? You a fan of Dunkirk?
Major fan of Dunkirk. I mean, if you've listened to any episode of the Film Dogs, I probably at least mention it once in every episode how much I love World War II history and war movies. So when this one came out, I was I'm not sure if it was something that I was highly anticipating. I was aware Nolan was making this film, and kind of some people would say the lack of soundtrack that's in it, because this is a movie that doesn't really have songs. We've got the score by our wonderful friend, not personal friend, but I wish it was, Hans Zimmer. And it is a film telling the story of the Battle of Dunkirk. But it's told without, like I said, without a soundtrack of songs that you would know from the radio or recorded by artists. It is mainly strings and tension building strings all the way through the movie. And then we've got sound design done by Richard King and his team. But did you have any thoughts specifically on Zimmer in this film?
Now,
or creative choices on that?
Yeah, totally. So doing some research for the episode, I had read about Hans Zimmer's process of getting the score together. And so he had started working on it in 2016. He worked on it for almost a year, and he created a 100-minute demo that he submitted to Christopher Nolan and said, like, here's what. So I imagine that maybe Christopher Nolan to this day still sort of requires almost an audition. It's not saying that, but the fact that he had to submit a demo to get accepted sort of indicates that. But they had this interesting thing. So Christopher Nolan submitted to Hans Zimmer a recording of a pocket watch that he has. And he goes, what I want you to do is create this thing called a shepherd tone, which is an auditory illusion that the pitch of something is either increasing or decreasing in pitch in octaves. So it'd be kind of like if you were playing a middle C and there's an illusion through ghost harmonics.
Yes.
That it sounds like the next octave up and the next octave up, or the next octave down and the next octave down. But in reality, nothing is really changing. It's always the same exact tone.
Yep.
And so this has been included into the soundtrack. And I think it speaks very highly of the type of definitely the side of Christopher Nolan that I love.
Yes.
He has a side that I don't love that I just like, and I admire every aspect of him. But he has some certain creative tendencies that I think are just wonderful. How he views time, and how he likes to employ music and sound into his films, which I think is like probably for me the much like Francis Ford Coppola is that I think that some of his taste is better than what his directing skill is. All of it becomes part of the directing, but part of directing is obviously telling actors what to do and making sure the story comes and But Christopher Nolan has just this massive talent of making sure that audio and strange visuals marry together in a unique way. He's so good at that. And his relationship with Hans Zimmer is just, it's essential to his movies. It's essential to his style of movies. Sound is so important to Christopher Nolan movies, and that is very modern. You go back and watch 70s movies and war films, like modern production and sound design is just so more advanced. Christopher Nolan embraces that. He really embraces the technology, inventing a new kind of film to shoot Oppenheimer. Like obviously he embraces the new and not just relying on the old. Yeah. So, but in the sense of how he employed Hans Zimmer's score into this film, like it's a gorgeous score. The sound of it though itself, how it's delivered to you, it's so three-dimensional. And some of the other films that we're going to talk about they sort of lack that three-dimensional. Like I think the melodic quality of the score is not fantastic. Like it's certainly okay. You're not looking at it. It's like, oh man, I want to buy that score and learn how to play that on the piano. This is not that. But for like, you could speak much more about how awesome like the volume swells and the dynamic range of the audio, the score itself, how it is presented, it's mixed so well. I would say for me, I feel like the mixing of the sound in Dunkirk is among the best of every film, any film that's ever been written or performed or viewed by an audience, especially for war films. Like it's mixed. The score is mixed so well. I don't have a lot of thoughts about the sound design for how the battle scenes and the airplane, like, and the way that I have comments about Heat or Civil War.
Yeah.
But for the score itself, for the Hans Zimmer part of it, I can't say enough about it. It's mixed so well. Like, I love that style of music. It's neoclassical. It has it's very cultural. Because it's a European movie, a British movie. They take the British, like, they don't really do a lot of American style sounds, like, are compositional choices. They take choices that are sort of very European and very British. And like, I love Christopher Nolan's attention to detail on, in this case, of whether he suggested it or not. But Hans Zimmer certainly was well aware. It's like, I'm not going to make any kind of arrangements that would sound like it was by an American composer. I want to make it sound like it was from a British composer or a European composer of the time. I also think it's a modern movie about a historical time in the 1940s, and I think the music really accurately reflected that. I think like that's a huge deal for me.
Well, it's a great story, like a real, a powerful story of. We were worried that it was going to be one of the greatest blunders of World War II, of our soldiers being cut off, the Allied soldiers all being cut off, and them trying to be evacuated from the French beaches in Dunkirk across the English Channel. And it's a pretty interesting creative choices that Nolan takes on this one, of not having really a proper soundtrack and kind of just doing a score instead. It mainly just being the strings, creating a constant tension for the whole film, but also of not really giving you characters with names and backgrounds. It's not a dialogue film, and it's not really about dialogue. He's telling this story kind of through the visuals and through the sound, which is crazy, because if you're looking at the cast, he's got Tom Hardy's in it. You've got Mark Rylance as well. Kenneth Branagh's in it. You also see he's got another ode to his favorite Cillian Murphy. Also a younger Barry Keoghan as well. Man, jeez.
Well, Harry Styles.
Yeah, Harry Styles. Like, it's a...
I like Harry Styles. Where are you on Harry Styles?
Yeah, and what's funny is Mrs. B knew this film because Harry Styles was in it.
Yeah, well, whatever. It's kind of...
and she watched it as well.
I like Harry Styles. Man.
Yeah. We're not anti-Harry on the pod.
Not at all. Hey, I just wonder... Could I read something really quick about this? Is super interesting because we're big Tar fans.
Bring it in.
So this is from Wikipedia, and it's just talking about the score and the composition. So Nimrod from Edward Elgar's Enigma Variations. So Edward Elgar is the composer of the cello concerto that in Tar, the young victim is playing, like, she's playing one of Edgar Elgar's cello concertos, and that's how she auditions, and Lydia decides that that's going to be the introduction piece to Mahler's Fifth.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting tie-in. So Nimrod from the Enigma Variations is part of the theme, which was slowed down to 6 beats per minute with added bass notes to avoid it sounding sentimental. Instrumentation included a double bass and 14 cellos played in a high register. Now, to understand how when orchestras make music, you have 4-stringed instruments. You have the cello, you have the double bass, you have the violin and the viola, and these all cover a dynamic range of sound. So
different frequencies.
The cello handles the low end frequency, and the violin handles the high end frequency.
Yes.
So you rarely would ever use a cello to achieve the high. You can get some high registered notes.
Yes.
But for someone to specifically use the cello to achieve the high end notes is a super interesting choice. and it's adventurous, and it goes against modern what's like classical sensibilities. I love the sort of, that's not even experimental. It's just sort of going against type and doing something that sounds modern by using something like Edward Elgar and not composing something new, using it's almost like doing a cover song. You're taking something and reinterpreting it. And the fact that Hans Zimmer is so open about doing that, and Christopher Nolan's so open about doing that, it's like it doesn't have to be original. It'd be kind of like if you took a famous Beethoven piece and slowed it down, let's say like For Elise, and slowed it down to where it was unrecognizable, and then you're doing it on a cello instead of a piano and a high register. Like, oh man,
well,
that's fascinating.
What's interesting though about the film, with what you just said though, is Nolan is playing with time in the film. That is partially the theme of Dunkirk. And it actually, if you've never watched it before and you watch it the first time, you might find it slightly confusing because it jumps backwards and forwards on a timeline, but still with this score underneath it as well, like you said, slowed down. 6 beats per second, very slow. And I just love whether that was creative decision on purpose or not, or we're just assigning value to it.
No, I'm sure.
I love how it always tells the story.
Talking about imagination, can you just imagine, like, to be on a set where the director is man, this should just be so fascinating for directors to be in this mode. But it's like you're talking to the composer, and it's like they're having great conversations the way that we're having right now, talking about time. And Hans Zimmer is saying, what do you think about this? And they're like, oh man, yes, yes, yes. And you know that film was filled with those kind of conversations. Yeah. And look, I think I said previously, Christopher Nolan, awarded by the Academy, our current best director. And I'll say that for the next year because that is what the Academy has told us. And I respect the Academy. And I will, I always thought that I loved Christopher Nolan. I think I just like Christopher Nolan. This isn't my favorite film. It's not my favorite war film, but I'll say this, from the sound perspective, it's up there. Like I think worthy of being in the top 5, as far as sound being a character in a film, just for all the reasons that we just said. Great film, great exploration of time. So 3 different narratives happening in the movie at the same time.
Yep.
It's a creative force. I just, like, for me, I just wish that it would have been, I liked I really love the concept. I'm just not that much into World War II. Not the way that you are.
Yeah.
And so I like that, just the way, if it had been a future or even what Civil War, like a future post-apocalypse type of Civil War, same type of thing, same concept, the way that it was delivered, that would have been, for me, oh man, that would have been Christopher Nolan's masterpiece.
Well, and I guess semi-closing out Dunkirk and moving on to our next film, one of the reasons why it's added, whether it is a beloved film from the Nolan catalog or somebody who likes or doesn't like World War II, this won the Academy Award for sound editing.
Totally.
Richard King and Alex Gibson, but also Hans Zimmer won it for the soundtrack, for the score, for what we've all just talked about. It got recognized for its creative genius.
I would, and I have this week during prep, listened to the Dunkirk soundtrack multiple times. It is good. It is a good background thing to listen to. Why do people work in silence? Why do people drive in silence?
Do people do that?
I know, I know for sure that they do. I find it very strange and alien that people do, but they do. But let me tell you, if you drive to work and you don't listen to, or if you listen to the radio or you listen to a podcast like a Film Dogs podcast, you should keep doing that. But if you listen to complete silence, my first recommendation is listen to a Film Dogs podcast. My second recommendation is the Dunkirk soundtrack. I would say to have on as background music, particularly if you're feeling any sort of melancholy or Yeah, it's not bright and happy music like the best of Mozart or Beethoven, but it's pretty daggone good.
Which brings us to film number 3, Trace. Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse Now.
Francis Ford Coppola.
FFC.
Score done by
FFC.
And Carmine.
And his brother. So, this was a very common practice. Like John Carpenter, essentially, I think he's kind of the most famous person that was like, because of budget restrictions, he's like, man, I can't afford to pay a composer. So by the way, like, I think that, just to quickly go back to Dunkirk, I think that Hans Zimmer got paid like $200,000 for his score. So, like, for all of you that are on the fence about taking a career in composing, it can be lucrative. If you think you're good, go for it. But here's the thing. So, John Carpenter didn't have the budget to do the soundtrack for Halloween or for Escape from New York, so he just ended up doing it himself. But I think that maybe he got the idea of that from Francis Ford Coppola, because Francis Ford Coppola did not want to he wanted to use his budget in other ways. Yeah. Probably for the massive good cast he put in there, like at the time. So we're talking about in the 70s, the budgets for films were just not what they are now. So like he did the score. Like, now I'll say this for me, for Apocalypse Now. I think I'm a little more critical of the sound, but I'll say like the idea of using this Richard Wagner Flight of the Valkyries while the helicopters were descending down the river, into the war zone, iconic scene, super iconic scene. And those kind of things weren't really thought of, and I still think that's such an original. I'm surprised that not more people pay homage to that or rip it off straight. Because it seems like
you don't think they do.
I do not think. Well, give me. Could you name another example where people would use like sort of in this war scenario where you're using sound, like not even just maybe not using like a classical music masterpiece, but like any kind of
juxtaposition.
The sound, like let's just say like in any modern war are people loading up speakers onto helicopters or drones and pounding them with some sort of sonic unusualness? Because that's what it would have been to the local Vietnamese. They'd be like, we've never heard Richard Wagner. We're like, what is this? The Americans are coming. Oh my goodness, we should be very scared. Even though it's heroic music, like it's not like if Master of Puppets was playing over. Now I would like, dude, if I was in charge of loading up the soundtrack of the helicopters that were descending upon the victims, man, it would be death metal.
Oh, Tom Sawyer.
Yeah, totally.
Ding 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 ding.
There's this great little Instagram reel on people using Bye Bye Birdie visuals to dancing to Metallica's Master of Puppets. It's so good. And people are like, oh, this sucks. Again, I was like, I just invite you to have an open mind when you're watching it. Anyway, Apocalypse Now. I think look, sound's incredibly important, but for me, and I know you rewatched it last night, I also rewatched it last night, and for me, the sound, man, dude, like, you'll be able to speak more about the sound than I can, but man, I don't think that the sound engineering for this film has aged well at all compared to the films that we've just talked about. I guess that's a fair statement. Like, technology was not what it was.
Yeah, so this was 1979. And Walter Murch, Mark Berger, Richard Beggs, Nathan Boxer for sound. They did win the Oscar for it. That being said,
I'd like to know who the competition was. I'll look into that while we're discussing. But one of the things that I had read was that Murch had problems trying to make a stereo soundtrack because sound libraries at the time had no recording of weapons. So whatever studios that, like all of the major studios, they did not have the modern access of like, we're just going to go record everything from butterflies snoring to cars exploding, and it'd be super realistic. So technology certainly like it might have been cutting edge at the time. It might have been awesome at the time. Watching it in 2024, after watching Civil War,
Yes. Yeah.
man, super fell flat.
Or
for
even
me.
watching Heat, because what? That's
Oh, yeah.
1996?
1995.
95.
Oh, yeah. I
yeah.
can't wait for the 95 draft. Yeah, look, I think that, and I think I mentioned over text with you, it just felt very like the sound just felt very one dimensional. Like the
Yeah.
voices were at the same exact level
Yeah.
as the bullets,
Yeah.
as the helicopter. Like everything was just this pleasant mix. There was no dynamic range.
Yeah.
There was no 3D-ness. There was no, I didn't feel immersed. Like, here's the thing. Civil War, you feel the sound is so good, you feel immersed. It was like when a pin drops to the right, you look to the right.
Yeah.
And when it drops to the left, or like you feel very immersed. And very, for me, like Apocalypse Now was just really flat.
Yeah, and obviously it is a bit hard to compare it to maybe Civil War in an Atmos theater, which that's not what we're doing. But yeah, sound wise is interesting because you sent me that message while I was so I was watching Apocalypse Now, but I had also recently finally watched Zone of Interest, which won for
For sound.
Sound.
Yeah.
But like you said, the biggie with Apocalypse Now is, you said the word dynamic range, which is correct. Because what's happening, and we're texting about it, especially with the amount of time that we are working on music or recording, or I consider myself a sound engineer, is there's a lot of compression. The all of the sound from this film,
ladies and gentlemen, the world's finest sound engineer, your Mr. B. I'm not kidding. He's great. He's dude. Don't be fucking shy about it.
It was just funny that we were talking about the movie. I was watching it live at home, and I had told you I was watching it, and your response to the movie, or that I was watching, is you go, "Yeah, great film. I'm not sure about the sound though." And it was like the moment you sent that text, I knew exactly what you meant though. You didn't have to say anything further, and then you had literally the next text later was like, "There's no dynamic range," and I go, "You are 100% correct," and that is what's happening. Is you're kind of going, "Man, it's a great visual film, but great cast.
Oh, look,
crazy story."
I'm not criticizing the film Apocalypse Now at all, because holy shit, it's so good. It is. It's weird and unusual and great and violent and absurd. And, like, it's everything that the film dogs love. I'm just talking from a sound perspective. Like, and I was listening to it on my headphones.
Yeah.
And normally that increases my pleasures times a million. In this case, it did the exact opposite. I'm like, oh my God, I'm criticizing Apocalypse Now, which might be like the best war movie of all time. And I'm not liking it at all. Like, I feel like maybe the studio should hire you to remix it.
Wait, well, I guess I wouldn't be opposed.
Let's lobby. Yeah. Let's lobby for that shit.
Yeah, but I guess what it loses in dynamic range, because everything is compressed, and maybe it had to do with the sound libraries that they had chosen from, which is what happens is when you're drawing from a pre-recorded recording, a file or something
as opposed to a live recording of a rifle being shot,
correct,
in real time,
and doing it yourself, with your equipment and stuff, but borrowing it from somewhere else, just like you see a photo uploaded online, that image gets compressed and made smaller, and you lose all the if you're looking at it on your camera that you had just taken it, or on a big HD screen, and then you upload it to Instagram, you go, wow, that photo doesn't look just as good. Well, it had to compress to be able to make everything work.
Yeah.
The kind of the problem with Apocalypse Now is that you're hearing all these gunshots and fires and explosions. And my response to you was, I go, yeah, it felt like I was watching, this was 79, but it felt heavily in the 70s of how movies sounded. And a lot of movies had this almost like muted radio sound where everything is just compressed. There is no dynamic range. A gunshot is just one volume. Every gunshot is kind of the same volume.
Whether or not that gun is being fired 6 miles to your right or 3 meters to your left, the gunshots all sound exactly the same.
And a grenade being thrown
Yeah.
doesn't have the same oomph or low end or bass response that you're used to on other things. It doesn't make you jump as like it does because compression takes loud things and it makes it quieter, but then it takes quieter things and makes it louder. So you lose that dynamic range. So I go, great film. We're not saying don't watch it. We're saying this is in the top 5 movies that you watch for war, for soundtrack and sound design, but we kind of go, we're not watching this one specifically for the sound design.
No, well, I think that it definitely by including this because it is a perfect double feature for Civil War.
It's a great contrast.
I think that it will show you how much sound design has advanced over the course of 30 years, 30 plus years, and. Yeah, like I would love to see it get I would just love to see it get remastered and remixed, and I think that is something that could be done.
Well, yeah, and when we were talking about the list of what movies should we include in the 5, Heat came up in the conversation, partially because we wanted to compare and contrast the Civil War or Apocalypse Now specifically to Heat, because Heat has some very famous gunfights that. The trick on those, I just want to cut the long story short because we're not going to talk about Heat. Heat is actually not in our list tonight. But I was like, man, are we sure we can't fit it in there? Because they were Marines, right? They're Marines.
Yeah, Val Kilmer was definitely Marine.
Robbing banks. No, but there's a very famous gun scene that happens, gunfight in the streets of LA. And it is deafening. It is one of the best gunfights that you could ever see or hear.
But not only that, like during the very first scene with the robbery, when the armored truck gets slammed in, but like, dude, when that semi slams into the armored truck, dude, that's like the best sound moment in cinematic history. And we're going to talk about that more in depth when we talk about soundtracks and score for gangster films or whatever genre that falls into that we choose. I think for time's sake, we should accelerate getting into The Empire Strikes Back.
Boom, boom, boom.
For those of you that don't think this is a war film,
just look at the planet Hoth.
Look at the title of the film. It's Star Wars. It's a war film.
And Galactic Civil War.
The Galactic Civil War, yes.
Score done by John Williams.
Oh, my God. All right. Here, we're talking about scores, we're talking about soundtracks, we're talking about sound design.
Yep.
Now, this movie has all of them, but I'll say this, and I will say this on record, and I will be devastated if when we get to the pre-88 drafts, the Empire Strikes Back doesn't make it onto my team. It better be your first number 1 pick. I'm telling you right now, it's going to be my first number 1 pick for the score.
I don't know how it couldn't be, but yeah.
For the score. For that bloody score, John Williams is a master. I think he just got nominated for Indiana Jones and whatever.
The Dial of Destiny,
the Refrigerator of Doom. Whatever these absurd names they assigned. But like he got nominated. Like I don't think that was like his great. Like he's going to get nominated because he's a master. He's a master composer. He studied the greats. He's comes up with these original things. But man, all right. First off, the opening of every Star Wars movie, the fanfare, the Star Wars fanfare. Are you kidding me, man? Like, dude, that is the best movie score of all time.
Yeah,
the best villain. So in Empire Strikes Back, we have the Imperial March, which George Lucas says it wasn't. A lot of people probably don't follow Star Wars so closely. They'll be like, oh, George Lucas directed everything until The Force Awakens. No, Irvin Kershner directed The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
And he had and George Lucas executive produced. So it was more Irvin's input to John Williams is like, I want a combination of Mars, the Bringer of War, and Chopin's Suffocation March, which turned into the Imperial March. So if you think like the Imperial March is the perfect marriage of it is the perfect marriage of two of the best classical music composers of all time. If not Chopin, the greatest pianist of all time, or the greatest composer of piano music of all time. I'll go on record for saying that hot take. Chopin is my personal hero for composing piano music. And the Imperial March is a marriage of two different styles of sort of modern classic and the romantic classical music. But then we're going to talk about also that a Galaxy of Sounds is a great thing to explore. It's a Disney sort of documentary on how the Star Wars franchise developed sound engineering for sci-fi.
Yep.
From all the droid noises.
Yeah.
From all the spaceship noises. It was the first to do all these things. Not only was it a trailblazer, it still remains number one. So from a sound perspective, this is a war film. It is many other things.
It's just a space war film.
It's many things besides a war film, but it is a war film.
Yeah.
And it has arguably the best fanfare score of all time. If that movie, when you go into the theater and the yellow text starts rolling down with the fanfare going, if you don't cry, then you're inhuman and you should not be listening to this podcast or any other podcast or be involved in movies at all. It is such a nostalgic feeling. But man, particularly the Imperial March for Darth Vader, that is just that is the greatest villain music of all time. That should be how football teams come onto the field. That should be how boxers come into the boxing match. When you're ready to go to war, man, I'll tell you what, if I was flying my helicopter down the river to meet my enemies, the Imperial March is what I'm playing, dude. 100 million% every single day. Oh God, I can't say enough about it.
Well, I mean, it did win the Oscar for Best Sound. It didn't win for score, but it did win for sound.
Let me ask you this: so John Williams received the financial bank check of $250,000 for the score for The Empire Strikes Back. Now, would you rather have $250,000 or some Oscar gold? Which is, I'll take. I'll take the 250 grand.
Back in 1980, I'll take the 200K, especially since that's all that Zimmer made in 2017 for Dunkirk.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, dude, it's just crazy. It's such a crazy good score. But the sound of lightsabers, the sound of laser swords and laser fire and explosions, and the Millennium Falcon, and how Death Stars explode. The sound is there is the score and there is the sound design. Man, it hits home runs. Man, this is like the New England Patriots in 2007 playing the Washington Redskins. By the way, at the time, they were the Washington Redskins. They're now the Washington Commanders. They've been like the worst franchise in sports forever. But they're my home team. So I'm just bringing that up as like the Patriots were the best team and my team was the worst team. And John Williams is the Patriots. And I don't know who everybody else is, but man, he was a masterclass. He's still a masterclass. Love him to death. Everything they were doing was right. In that movie, they had everything going for them. They had the best sound design. They were trailblazers in sound design. I'm sure that there could be some fairly good insights into everything sound engineering wise that I don't know, but I don't think much has improved on Empire Strikes Back from a sound perspective.
Well, I mean, and we were introduced to what wasn't, didn't, we got the Han and Leia theme as well on this, we didn't get that on the first one.
I know.
A New Hope. I love you. It's playing in my head right now. Like how iconic.
That'd be one of the most discussed scenes of like romantic history. It's like, oh, you couldn't just say I love you back. That would be such a sort of a modern 2024.
Yeah.
Whoever's writing the screenplay is going to be like, no, that would never get written now. Oh, come on, man. Like Han Solo, he was a scoundrel. Like he wasn't a dashing. Oh, come on. You got to watch the movie to understand. I hope everybody's seen it. If you haven't.
If not, you should be ashamed. Would you please stop the podcast and turn on Empire Strikes Back if you've never watched it before?
It's on Disney
arguably, not even arguably, it has been called the most famous / best sequel of all time.
I think.
What do you think about on that statement?
Look, I will say for me that it definitely is the number one sequel of all time. I think Dune 2 could be in the conversation. A lot of, I think most cinephiles would say The Godfather 2 it would be their preference.
Mm-hmm.
And then modern cinephiles will say The Dark Knight is their preference. And so like it all becomes a matter of taste, of which I won't criticize. Like I don't criticize people's taste ever for anything, ever.
Yeah.
I just don't. I never will, no matter what anyone says. I do not criticize taste. I criticize how people communicate, and I am unashamed about doing that. I believe in strong communication. And if you mean something, to say exactly what you mean rather than letting it vague. And let's have a conversation about it rather than being a keyboard warrior. But for taste, I don't mind. So some people have Godfather 2, some people have Empire Strikes Back, some people have Dark Knight. I'm sure that a large number of modern audiences will pick Dune 2. And I think all four of them are worthy for the conversation. For me, Empire Strikes Back, definitely my number one sequel of all time.
Which leads us to our final film of the evening. Take it away, Lord Marcus.
Good Morning Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Now, so one of the reasons that we picked this film is because of the journalistic aspect of Good Morning Vietnam as compared to like Civil War. And I did want to kind of like do Full Metal Jacket, but I think we can do Full Metal Jacket in a different episode.
Yeah,
the sound wasn't as important on that. Now, with Good Morning Vietnam, I kind of think like Robin Williams invented podcasting. And Good Morning Vietnam, or maybe Barry Levinson invented
Barry Levinson
podcasting. Robin Williams.
Yeah.
So, here's the thing about the sound is that you have to sort of juxtapose the audio sensation of being on air as opposed to the rest of regular conversations, and how you know when you're just listening to it. So if you're listening to this movie and not watching it and it's on in the background, you know when Adrian Cronauer's on air, and you know when he's talking to somebody in real life. So that's part of the sound design. I think it was really good. Now, Alex North had, he did like a very small composition, and it's just sort of been remastered. But I think that for me, the more important thing about Good Morning Vietnam, besides how it relates to Civil War and how journalism and war are so very finely tuned and married to each other, because like what point is war if you don't have somebody reporting on it and telling what the real facts are? And that might be different like for today, but always like part of filmmaking is kind of like journalism, in the way that we are telling people how to feel or suggesting people that there's options to feel that maybe they hadn't considered before. But particularly about this thing with Good Morning Vietnam was that, let's look at some of the other Vietnam War movies like Platoon or Apocalypse Now.
Yep.
The Good Morning Vietnam soundtrack was, I thought, just more accurate on what people, like what GIs were listening to when they were in Vietnam, particularly at the start of the Vietnam War. So in 1965, what was popular on the radio? It was the Beach, like the Good Morning Vietnam soundtrack is just flooded with Beach Boys.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that like it's the only one that is. And I think that is so much more realistic. Now, what else was famous in 1965? Well, the Doors, the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, Rolling Stones. Like there was all these crazy like good things, but the Beach Boys were also super popular, and that the soundtrack was just sort of super Beach Boys centric, or that style of music, as opposed to The End by the Doors, which is how Apocalypse Now, and I just keep going back to Oliver Stone. Like, he also did the Doors movie. So we're in a totally different and a mind frame there. I just found it so refreshing. You know, first off, Robin Williams invents podcasting, and it won the Grammy Award for Best Comedy Album of the Year because of the inclusions of the Robin Williams sound clips.
Mm-hmm. Were you a Beach Boys fan at all?
I never really, so I have been a lifelong passionate music person, and like Pet Sounds was always listed as like sort of like Sgt. Pepper's. I don't listen to it. It's like one of those films that is everybody considers to be 10-star and the greatest films of all time, and you just don't connect with it.
Yeah.
I can see why people like it. I just don't. I just don't really
It's
like
not
it.
your bag.
Yeah, Beach Boys are just not really my scene.
Yeah.
But if I was making a period correct piece that took place when the Beach Boys were doing their thing, I would use them wholeheartedly because they definitely have a sound that represents an era.
Yeah, they speak to a certain time for sure.
Of which I respect that. So like I respect the historicity of it. Maybe not necessarily. I would throw a Beach Boys record on.
Yeah.
Not like so. I would throw on an Elvis sound. Like I love Elvis. I love music of that time. But if we're talking about 1965, man, the Doors and Bob Dylan and Jimi Hendrix are it for me. Like those are. I'm not ever going to go to Beach Boys. It's too happy and it's too surfy, and I'm not a surfer.
Yeah,
you know, like I'm not a Southern California hanging out.
Yeah,
on the
you're
beach,
not a SoCal boy,
buff dude hanging out at Muscle Beach on the Venice Boardwalk. But mad props to everybody that is, particularly if you're in Russia. Mad props to you. Thanks, Russians, for enjoying our podcast. But that's all I really have to say about Good Morning Vietnam, other than Sir Robin Williams, we knight you in Film Dog Land, and I hope you're resting in eternal peace.
And yeah,
what a great film that you've made with Good Morning Vietnam. Nobody else could have done that role. Super great.
There's so many roles that he's played that just nobody else could do them.
Totally
iconic. And I mean, he did get the nom for Best Actor, but didn't win. But hey, he got a Grammy from it at least.
Yeah, you know, like what a phenomenal talent that
he did get the Golden Globe.
You know, here's the thing. You know, like I don't think enough people speak on mental health, particularly with comedians. It's my understanding, and I know a couple of comedians, and they struggle with mental health, and it seems like a common theme among comedians. And I just really want people to maybe take the time to, if you know someone that's in the stand-up comic industry and that's really trying to make it and struggling with mental health, just reach out to them and say, hey man, you are loved, you are appreciated, and you're funny, but you're not just funny, you're a human and we love you, as opposed to you just are here to serve for my entertainment. And I think that's what often happens, particularly, and it probably happens with many things. Like if you're a great pianist or a great sound engineer, entertain me. Entertain me. And like that's only part of what the humans do. Like we all feel like all people that in the entertainment industry and creative types, like we want to entertain and we want to do that, but we have other needs and feelings as well. Please reach out to your creative types and let them know they're loved.
Sometimes the happiest people in public are not the happiest people in private.
God bless you.
Well, Lord Marcus, let's maybe re-go over the top 5 war movies that you should watch for their scores and for their sounds.
Most recently released, what you could still see this in the theater. I highly encourage you to do so.
Yes.
Civil War by Alex Garland.
Dunkirk, Christopher Nolan.
Apocalypse Now by Francis Ford Coppola, now streaming on Stan.
Empire Strikes Back, Irvin Kershner directed.
Definitely on Disney Plus if you don't own a copy of the DVD or the Blu-ray.
Or the VHS.
And then Good Morning Vietnam, which is definitely on binge.
Barry Levinson directed.
1987. That was actually like the first date movie I ever went on, by the way. First time I made out in the theater. Good Morning Vietnam.
What a memory. There's a few Seinfeld jokes in this episode that I had thought of that yeah.
You're going to share one of them. Share one of them.
You made out during Schindler's List? Which is we'll close the podcast on.
Totally. Yeah. Great ending, man. Hey, may peace be with you out there in Film Dog Land.
And also with you. Make sure you reach out to us on social media. You can find us on Instagram under Film Dogs. You can find us on Facebook under The Film Dogs. And you can find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. But I am Mr. B.
And I am Lord Marcus. And I was going to give an extra shout out to our appreciators in Russia. Thanks for listening.
And keep listening.
Please.
We need you. Woof.
Woof.